Hola a todos! I'm going to be chatting about A-Level Spanish Paper 2 and looking at all of the previous exam questions for La Casa de Bernarda Alba and Volver to predict what sorts of themes or questions could come up in this year's paper. I did a similar thing last year when I sat this paper and I got 70 out of 80 last summer. Vale, vamos! So I'm going to start off with La Casa de Bernarda Alba. In terms of characters, let's make a list of all of the main characters in this play. So we've got the daughters, we've got Adela as being the most important. Then I guess I would say Angustias is the second important. We've got Martirio, Amelia, and Magdalena. So 5 daughters. Generally, Amelia and Magdalena are the two sort of less important ones. They're almost secondary characters, and they're the middle sort of age daughters. The most important ones are definitely the first 3, Adela, Angustias, and Martirio. Now, we've had a question on Adela in 2023, which says, Adela es el único personaje realmente trágico en La Casa de Bernarda Alba. To what point, so to what extent do you agree? So we've had a question on Adela quite recently. Angustias we haven't had, and that's the one I'm predicting for this year, because Martirio we had in 2024. Just the year that's just gone, we had a character question on Martirio. So Angustias is the one I'm predicting for this year. And recently, AQA exam style questions have been in the style of a statement, so we might see something like Angustias representa la hipocresía y la injusticia dentro de la familia de Bernarda. ¿Hasta qué punto maybe estás de acuerdo con esta afirmación? Some sort of sentence like that. There's so much to say about Angustias in terms of her age being the oldest daughter. She's 39 years old. In terms of why she's getting married to Pepe and why Pepe has picked her, because she has the most money, because she is the daughter of Bernarda's first husband. We can think about the scene, I think it was in Act 2, when La Poncia tells Adela that Angustias is going to be the first to die after she won't survive her first sort of childbirth, and then Pepe is going to pick Adela to sort of have a relationship with and potentially marry in the future. Make sure you revise Angustias, who's definitely a character I think that can come up this year. Even, for example, in Act 3, we see the scene where Angustias is telling Bernarda that I find him distracted. She says, Yo lo encuentro distraído, and we can sense that it's because of his relationship with Adela. And then Bernarda's advice is, Habla si él habla y míralo cuando te mire, así no tendrás disgustos. And we see Bernarda teaching Angustias everything that sort of she had to put up with when she was married. Okay, other characters are the men. So we see people like Pepe el Romano, and also so Pepe el Romano, Enrico Umanes, which is quite a sort of similar sort of story to Pepe el Romano. So Enrico Umanes was the one who wants to marry Martirio, but he wasn't allowed. Bernarda did not let him because he was from a poorer family. We also have characters like, so obviously the main characters, Bernarda is the main character. We have Maria Josefa, who also sort of came up last year in terms of the question about generations and the differences in the generations. So even though Maria Josefa is a very, very good character in the sense that she's very similar to Adela, and her being the oldest and Adela being the youngest, they've got this sort of cyclical structure in the sense that the youngest person in the family and the oldest person both have similar desires. But Maria Josefa sort of came up last year in terms of generations. Of course, we can see a basic character question on Bernarda, but she has come up, for example, 2018. Do you think Bernarda is a monster or simply a victim of the world that she lives in? So maybe we won't see Bernarda sort of directly head on, but Pepe el Romano is definitely a character I can envision coming up. Even in terms of invisible characters, obviously Pepe is never on the screen, but he's got such a big influence on the plot and the house. So something like a question about men and invisible characters, talking about Enrico Manes, Pepe el Romano, even characters like Paca la Rosetta, which we don't see or hear from, but we hear stories about in sort of that third person. We may see a question like, aunque nunca aparecen en la escena, los hombres tienen una presencia poderosa a lo largo de la obra, analizar, blah, blah, blah. To what extent do you agree? I think invisible characters is a really good one, and that's one that came up in one of the sample sort of questions in like a study guide. But yeah, Angustias, Pepe Romano are both my sort of character predictions this year. In terms of themes, death is definitely a theme that can come up, and it has come up in Volver a couple years ago. But in terms of death, we see a few deaths. We see obviously mainly Adela's suicide. The play starts off, so the cyclical structure starts off with the death. It starts off with Antonio Maria Benavides, AMB's funeral, and this was Bernarda's second husband. We see Pepe el Romano being shot. That's also a death, even though he doesn't actually die. We can see how that death impacts, for example, Adela and the rest of the story. So the theme of death is definitely one I think that could come up this year. And lastly, in terms of symbols, I know I said this last year when I made my video for this last year. In terms of symbols, fire or sort of heat and the idea of summer is a very good symbol. We see a lot of references to heat in summer. We see martirio in Act 2 says este verano interminable, talking about this never-ending cycle of sort of heat in summer, este verano interminable. And heat pretty much represents oppression. We may see talking about things like El Bastón, which is a very common, obviously, symbol, one of the most important symbols, and it comes up in a lot of questions. But we could see sort of 2 or 3 symbols mentioned together. For example, which symbol is the most important, or something as basic as like analizar el uso del calor como símbolo en la obra. We could talk about how maybe it's the most important symbol, or perhaps it might be second important, third important, compared to things like El Bastón, el agua, which came up in 2020, is a very hard question. Analizar el uso del agua como símbolo. Those are my 4 predictions. We've got Angustias, Pepe el Romano, or men or invisible characters as a whole, the theme of death, and then symbols in terms of fire and heat in summer. Okay, and that covers my 4 predictions for La Casa de Bernarda Alba for 2025. Of course, this goes without saying, you need to revise all the topics, all the characters, make sure you know lots of quotes and you know the plot really, really well. But these would be some sort of interesting questions I'd hope AQA to sort of use this year, just because they haven't been asked as much in previous years. On astarspanish.com/LCDBA, you can see all of my resources for La Casa. I've got loads of videos going through the plot and the setting analysis and quotes. And I've got a list of all of the exam questions, which is where this document is taken from, or the screenshot's taken from. You can see questions from NXL, from AS papers. It's really interesting to see what other questions have been asked by other exam boards to take inspiration for what we might see in this year's AQA paper. Okay, now moving on to Volver. In 2024, we had a question focusing on women and sort of motherly love. So the opposite of that is going to be sort of the paternal love and the male characters. We did see a question about men in 2018, but since then we haven't had a question about men. So I think men is definitely going to be a really good question this year, a good topic this year. We've got loads of men we can talk about. For example, Paco, Raimundo's dad, and the similarities, for example, between them. And then in Madrid, we've got some perhaps nice men, people like Emilio, the boys, the sort of filming guys. So we'll say La Chico de Grabación. And we've also got absent men, and generally men are quite absent in this film. It's a very sort of female-orientated film. We don't see a lot of the male characters there. They either die quite early on, like Paco, or they're seen in quite a negative light. For example, Sole's husband is absent and sort of leaves her. So men is definitely my first prediction this year. We could see a question like analizar cómo presenta Almodóvar las figuras masculinas en Volver, qué impacto tienen en la vida de las protagonistas, because men generally, just like in La Casa, have a strong impact on the plot of the movie in this case, and the sort of women's lives, even though they are barely sort of seen in the movie and they're very sort of, again, invisible characters. In terms of other themes, the biggest one I would love to see this year is lies and secrets, so las mentiras, which there are absolutely loads of, and secretos. The whole movie is pretty much about this, or loads of lies and secrets. That, for example, Paco's murder being the biggest one. No one really knows that Paco has been murdered, especially by who. Raimunda and Paula both sort of cover up together. Raimunda, for example, then has to lie to Sole, saying she can't attend Tia Paula's funeral, and she says that she's got loads of ironing to do in sort of the first few scenes. And then, for example, Raimunda doesn't tell Paula who her real father is. Lots of different lies. Irene as well, in terms of when she's hiding and she doesn't come clean until the very end, that she's the one who actually killed Agostina's mother and her husband. So lies and secrets would be a really good theme. It has come up in LXL before, but not for AQA. Definitely a wonderful, pretty big theme. Definitely a really good one for this year. Quite an easy question, hopefully, as well. So make sure you go through all the different examples of lies and secrets from the various characters, no matter how big or small. In terms of LXL questions, so on astarspanish.com/Volver, you can see I've got a list of all the exam questions from different exam boards from WJC, LXL, and the AS questions, which is where this picture is taken from. Linking back onto Irene, we could think about the idea of bad characters. So we see a lot of sort of crimes committed, most notably Irene's murder, in terms of the murder that she does, in terms of the people that she kills, and then Paco's murder in terms of the murder that's done to him. 2 crimes that are committed, 2 people that have been killed, and there is no sort of punishment for either of these characters. So this idea of, are these characters morally bad? Maybe, why are they not punished? Why are they forgiven? A question like, a pesar de sus acciones discutibles, los personajes principales de Volver no se pueden considerar moralmente malos, so we cannot consider them as bad people, and why are they forgived? But this idea of where is the punishment? Irene herself says when she comes clean to Raimunda, she says she thought she was going to get caught, or get punished, but she never ends up being caught. And in terms of the mentiras question, just to go back, something like en Volver, las mentiras y los secretos no destruyen a las mujeres, sino que las protegen, which is very true. Lies sort of they all lie to each other, and it all helps them build a stronger relationship. There's no sort of, we don't see any fallout based on these lies or anything negative coming from these lies. They're all considered white lies and the secrets that are kept. And then lastly, my last prediction in terms of a character question is going to be on Sole. We've seen Raimunda, we've seen Paula recently as well. So in 2022, Agustina came up. In 2023, Paula came up as character questions. Solia hasn't come up. She's not the biggest character, but she's got a lot of links with Paula, and their relationship is like the aunt. Solia and Paula stays a lot at Solia's flat, and then we've got the relationship Solia's got with Irene, with Raimunda. So in terms of character question, maybe about her, analizar el papel de Sole, cuál es su importancia en el desarrollo de la trama y en la representación de la familia. She forms a pretty big part of Raimunda's family. In terms of the 2024 question, we had director techniques come up, which is quite a hard question, thinking about color, sound, music, and sort of the different clothing and camera shots and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not expecting director techniques again a second year in a row, but in every single essay you write, you've got to try and mention director techniques. So thinking about the camera shots, it's always really important. The use of color, how that corresponds to a theme. For example, the color red of Raimunda as a character, but even as a theme, red is quite a strong color. It symbolizes things like death and blood. As a symbol, maybe the knife that we see Paula used to kill Paco. And pretty much those are my full predictions this year for Volver. We've got men, we've got Mentiras y Secretos, which would be such a good question. We've got Sole as a character, and we've got this idea of, are these characters bad or good? Why are they sort of being forgiven? Idea of punishment, the lack of punishment. Those are my predictions for Volver. Okay, I hope that was super useful. Let me know after the exam, which for this year is on the 11th of June, quite a bit earlier than it was for me last year. Let me know what questions you end up getting and how well you think you do. But I hope some of these predictions come true. In terms of the last thing to mention before the end of this video is for paper 1, I'm doing some group sort of live sessions. I'm doing a 2-hour session on the 28th of May and then an hour session the night before the real exam for paper 1, which is on the 3rd of June this year. You can buy tickets to those on astarspanish.com/revision. Paper 1 is 50% of your grade. Paper 2 is only 20%. So please think about which papers you're going to revise a bit more on and how you spend your time. Vale, best of luck. Adios.